Hey, welcome back to the Cruise Elite Podcast. I'm Taylor, and I'm here with Tony. What's up, Tony?
Good morning, Taylor.
How's it going?
I'm about halfway through my training. I'm going to put that in quotes just because it's so, such a... I don't want to even say it's a low bar, but it's just not, the most impressive thing. But, I'm doing this 5K.
Yep.
And so I'm using this app, Couch to 5K, which, honestly, I think is really well designed. But basically, it does interval training, like walking, running, and it slowly increases how much running you're doing until you can run a 5K in 8 weeks. And so I'm halfway through that. And some interesting things have been happening, that I thought, you might be interested in. My knee stuff that I've been complaining about for so long has pretty much disappeared.
Nice.
Since I've been running regularly. So that's really interesting. But I'm also getting a different knee pain in the same knee on occasion from impact, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's new and discouraging.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it kind of shows this stuff is just so amorphous, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Running is a beast.
Yeah.
It is. There's an adaptation period too. And a lot of times your tissues are talking to you a little bit from it, and you will adapt. Hopefully that's how it will go.
It's how it's been going. Yeah. This last session was the first time where I was like, oh, this is new, this impact thing. And I was going downhill in an alley. So it's really, heavy pavement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I just, was tired and a little careless.
Yeah. And the other thing, something to consider that can really, really help, because a lot of times towards the end of, training, like endurance training, is when you're at a little higher risk for stuff like that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be a bad idea to have some calories with you. And even if you don't feel like you're going that far, it still helps. It can go a long way.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I didn't have my usual pre-run carb snack,
There you go. Yeah. Making sure you have that going into it could be huge. And then, even possibly during, if, I don't know if you take any breaks or what, but maybe even just have a little gel pack or something.
Interesting.
It goes a long way. You'd be amazed when your nervous system starts to fatigue out a little bit or just get a little overwhelmed. That's generally when those types of threat responses happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and fueling yourself a little bit more, man, that goes a long way. I really learned that myself when we first moved to New Hampshire and started doing a lot more hiking. And the hiking was just kicking our butts because we were just, flatlanders coming into the New Hampshire mountains.
Sure.
And yeah, we started hiking a lot and just really started to learn the value of having fuel with us. Even if we were only hiking for an hour, it was a big help for us.
Yeah. No, definitely something to think about. I think I'm prone to being underfueled sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is just take care of your joints. Basic joint mobility drills, man, so helpful for just kind of decompressing after running.
Mm-hmm.
Just doing something healthy for your joints, and man, it's a big deal.
Yeah. What's your go-to trail snack?
So we mostly just do it in a liquid form for the type of hike that we're doing. If we were going on a really long hike, I think probably, gosh, honestly, it ends up being just based on convenience. But man, we'll take breaks, right? So we can bring fruit and things like that, and
sure,
honey and little piece of chocolate and that kind of thing, But other than that, we usually have an electrolyte drink going, like a homemade electrolyte drink that we really like. And, it was funny. We experimented for a while with baking soda and mixing it into our electrolyte drink.
Interesting.
There's a lot of, this is something that's it's been around for a long time. And, some people like it. Some people say, I think there's, like everything, there's two camps on this. And I had an amazing experience with baking soda helping my endurance, and would just mix it right into a drink. And man, When we do our long hikes, we will usually do that.
What about baking soda?
Well, I think it produces CO2, and CO2
Ah,
basically CO2 basically fixes everything.
yeah,
It's kind of funny. Improves circulation, helps energy. So it's definitely something that I don't know if it's for everybody, because
hmm
not everybody can take the amount of baking soda that is actually suggested. But we didn't do that much. If I remember correctly, we were putting like a quarter teaspoon into a large water bottle, and that was fine. But some people take it to the extreme and do like baking soda loading, where they're doing like high amounts of baking soda before an
sure,
endurance type of event. And I think you have to build up to that, and not everybody can handle that. And I don't even know if that's, I don't
right.
even know if that's the healthiest thing. I'm not sure. But I'll tell you what, that little quarter teaspoon of baking soda in our water bottle with the electrolyte drink, man, that made a big difference.
That's fascinating. I
Yeah.
feel like you're like an explorer, and you're like trying new things out on the frontier.
Yeah. I'm
It's
not
not.
afraid to try stuff and see. Although I'll tell you what, I haven't done that in a while because I haven't done any super long hikes in a while. So
Yeah.
it just, our lifestyle shifted based on, our daughter's age and what she can tolerate for hiking. And at one point I was carrying her and we were going a long ways, and she got bigger and now I'm not carrying her as far. And now she's in between where she'll do some of the hike on her own. Then I carry her for some. So yeah, we haven't been going as far, but we'll get back.
Yeah, you'll get back.
Yeah.
Getting back to regular movement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Today we're going to be talking about movement and specifically the movement box. This
Yeah.
concept that you've introduced pretty much since the beginning.
Yeah.
And I really latched onto it immediately as just like,
I
oh,
remember that.
this is something that really makes sense to me. And so I thought we could talk about expanding your movement box and specifically getting people who aren't moving as much. Maybe they're sedentary, or maybe they're athletes, but they're not moving optimally.
Mm-hmm.
They're not moving in certain ways that would be beneficial. And so I thought it'd be good to just start with talking about what is the movement box as a concept.
Great. So yeah, this is a really neat educational concept. This is essentially how I would explain to clients why we are doing the variety of different weird movement things that they haven't experienced before. The way that I explain it is that everybody has a movement box, and if you visualize this, you basically draw a box around a person. And within that box, or I should say, that box represents all of a person's movement options. So that's how I think about movement, is literally options, because every single movement that we do is always different. Even neurologically, we tend to people tend to think that movements happen in patterns, and then we tend to think that patterns happen the same way every time. But every single movement that you make, even if you think it's the same movement, like if I ask you to squat 10 times, your brain and nervous system uses 10 different patterns to do that. It's not the same pattern every time,
Hmm.
which is very fascinating, because that's how we are as creatures, right? We're very adaptable, and because our environment is constantly changing and sensory input is constantly changing, no movement is ever the same. So our nervous system has to sort these things out and figure out how to adapt in the moment to produce the highest quality, hopefully pain free movement. And so I always think about movement as options. And we all have our options that are available to us. And we build those options based on our experiences and our training, right? And what we've been exposed to. So the key with movement is to get good exposure to movement in different ways so that we can build those options, and then our brain and our nervous system can call on those options as we need them. We've had exposure to those things. So the more movement options a person has, the larger the box is. So you've got a really big box around you if you've had exposure to a lot of different types of movements and activities and you have good training. And just like anything that can be trained and improved and expanded, it also can be detrained. So accidentally, maybe we don't get that exposure anymore. And now that movement box is going to shrink. Maybe it's because you used to be an athlete and now you're not an athlete anymore. Or you had a big movement box when you were 25 and now you're 85 and that box has shrunk because you're not getting that exposure and that input and those movement experiences anymore the way that you used to. So we've got this movement box that represents all of our options. We can grow the box through exposure to movement. And that box can also shrink, maybe by injury, by becoming deconditioned, or maybe just not by having a lot of movement experiences ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have a smaller movement box, less movement options.
Yeah. Yeah. So you brought up like the squat, and I think that that's a good one. If you've never squatted down past your knees,
Mm-hmm.
and some people can just sit in that squat position.
Right.
If you haven't done that for 10 years, 15
Mm-hmm.
years, what happens when you accidentally or have to get in that position that's outside of your box?
Well, it's situational and it's based on the individual. So sometimes for the person that has extensive experience,
Mm-hmm.
maybe as an athlete at one point in their life, sometimes you can ask that person to squat deeper again. And it's as if they remember, right? They're able to do it. It's not as threatening. It's not as scary. They may not have the tissue tolerance that they once had, which is this is a very important part of the concept. But generally speaking, they can do it. They kind of remember. It becomes novel again. It reminds them of when they used to do it, and their body could really like that.
Hmm.
Okay. And then you take someone else who has been deconditioned for a longer period of time, or maybe they don't have those athletic experiences. They never did any kind of exercise before, and they're just starting to learn how to strength train, let's say. And they're 40 years old and have no experience. And they've never really squatted below parallel,
Mm-hmm.
besides when they were a kid and they didn't even know they were doing it.
Right.
Right. So that you take that person and you go have them squat below parallel under load, let's say. And there's generally more risk involved in that just because there's less tissue tolerance and because you might not have the maps for squatting below parallel. Things might be a little bit more uncertain for your brain and your nervous system. And your brain hates uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
because everything about our neurology is very predictive in nature. People don't realize this, but your ability to move through the world efficiently in a pain-free body, a lot of that comes down to how well your nervous system and all of your senses can actually predict, which is a wild concept, but it makes sense when you start to really think about it, because when things become more unpredictable, if you don't have the maps for that, you don't have previous experience that your brain can kind of relate back to as it's taking in all this sensory information, things can become more threatening in a certain movement. So that below parallel squat, because the maps aren't there, your body might eventually go, I don't know if I like this. And that's when we start to see signs of, let's say, startle, which is essentially the nervous system becoming a little bit uncertain about things. And that's usually when tension builds in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Tension is really the enemy of efficiency. So as we build tension because of that uncertainty, your nervous system is trying to protect you. So let's not forget that. So tension is very protective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if your brain and your body's a little unsure, that's sometimes when our body starts talking to us and we start saying, my knee, my knee doesn't feel too good. That's weird. All I'm doing is squatting. All I'm doing here is squatting below parallel. My low back's feeling a little tight. I must be doing something wrong.
Right.
Right. How
Right.
many times do
It's
people
my
say
form
that?
issue, right? It's a
Yeah.
form
It's my
issue.
form issue. And maybe it is because there is it's very we could debate this forever, but there's optimal movement, I think, and then there's suboptimal. But the thing is, and this is what's so fascinating, is that when you're learning how to exercise for let's say the first time, and you're getting involved in all these basic movement patterns that we would teach for strength training, there are rules that are ideal to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We create rules for that. Okay, I want you to set up the position like this. Let's try not to go deeper than this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make sure that, when you squat, you don't like roll up on your toes. We want to keep your heel down,
Mm-hmm.
those types of things. There's rules. But as somebody progresses and becomes very experienced, that's when I say now you can start to break rules. And that has to do with building out that movement box. When your movement box gets so big that you have all these options, you can start to break rules, and you aren't necessarily going to pay a price for that.
Mm-hmm.
So
whereas someone new, they break the rule, right? They're
yes,
squatting on their toes and their back's hunched over and their knees going way out.
That's right.
That's when maybe you add load to that, they might injure themselves or something.
Yes, exactly. And it's like not always. I hate to. It's an interesting thing. I mean, people can get away with suboptimal movement for a long time because, listen, we are amazing at compensating.
Right.
And generally, you can compensate your way through without anything catastrophic happening. In fact, when it comes to learning to exercise, it's interesting. People, they can get scared of certain movements, especially if you've had pain. If you've had knee pain before, the idea or even watching somebody squat all the way to, a bottomed out position might, give you goosebumps.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. Usually people who get injured exercising, this is really my opinion anyway, they don't get injured from the exercise. They get injured from their lifestyle stress and the buildup of the threat bucket, the famous threat bucket, right? The threat inside the bucket. Because we can generally get away with low quality movement for a very long time.
Yeah, you get up, you have some breakfast, then you sit at a computer for
Right.
8 hours plus, then you get in your car, you sit for a drive, then
Yeah.
you sit for dinner. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a normal day for a lot of us.
It is. And obviously you could be somebody that's really pursuing lifting very heavy loads in the gym or something. And maybe something catastrophic happens. But for the general population, it doesn't really work like that, right? Those of us who are just kind of going through general fitness, we're not necessarily pushing the limits too much. We don't have, goals about deadlifting, deadlifting 500-600 pounds. Those of us who get injured exercising, yeah, it's usually the lifestyle stress and the threat bucket rather than the movement itself, which is really interesting to think about. So the whole like good form thing becomes very debatable. I think there's a mechanical advantage, the way that we can produce better quality movement, especially under load. I think there is an ideal way to do it, I guess. But yeah, it's there's a lot of things that go into it.
Well, let's dig into that just a little bit, just because I think that there's something to be gleaned from this conversation. So, if someone is untrained or detrained,
Mm-hmm.
they are not used to doing X, Y, and Z movement, right? And if they do that movement, it may be a novel stimulus, it may be a good thing, or it may be really threatening. You may get injured, you may just feel, the fear and tension of injury.
Mm-hmm.
Like with form and a squat, if you are learning like a strict powerlifting squat,
Mm-hmm.
and you learn that movement and you train that movement, you own that movement after a while. It becomes part of your movement box, right?
Right.
So then deviating from that form might then start the cycle all over again, right? It might
That's a
be
great point.
novel in a good way. It might be novel in a very threatening way.
That's right. That's a great point.
So maybe the standard is good just because you are staying within a pattern that your nervous system knows and likes.
Oh, that's a great point. And that's also why somebody who has a lot of experience can actually still have a small movement box, right? So I think about like me in high school, right? I was really into powerlifting, very strong, doing a lot of squatting, deadlifting, bench pressing, and some accessory work kind of based, around that.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate because even at that age, I had coaches and stuff that were giving me pretty good advice, and I was able to make things more dynamic than probably someone else that age. But if I really think about that version of myself, I was incredibly strong, but I didn't have the movement options that I probably thought I had.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually a time in my life where I had the highest injury rate that I've ever had before. Even though I was my strongest, my most powerful, my fastest, everything was better. Everything. I mean, it was,
Oh, to
but
be young.
yes, yes, but I got hurt. And some of that was just not understanding recovery time, right? And that I can't just practice my max bench press 3 times a week, right? So there was some maturing that had to do that I had to do with all of that and learning. But the point is, even though I could move those big loads through those ranges of motion, everything that I was doing was still very linear. And so I didn't have the options that I thought I did. And so my movement box was still kind of on the smaller side compared to what it is now, because I practice a lot of unconventional type movements, things that bring me into lots of different planes of motion, using exercises that load my body in unconventional ways, sort of the ways that beginners or very traditionalists might look at me and go, "Hey, that's going to get you injured. That's going to hurt your body." And the fact is, it doesn't, because of the options that I have, because I've had exposure to that type of thing for a very long time. So, yeah, it's interesting how even someone who's well experienced could also have a smaller movement box.
Yeah. Going back to like the more sedentary individual,
Yeah,
we've talked so far about, threat that comes when you move outside of your movement box.
right.
But I also hear a lot about sedentary individuals just having kind of nagging tightness in the neck, back pain, just kind of stuff that
Yep.
seems to be solved when they start exercising for the first time, when they start
Yeah.
doing something and they say, wow, it's like, great, my neck pain, my back pain, it's going away. I'm sure you've encountered this a million times.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
I think a lot of it is novelty, right? And in the body really being a super responder, right? Compared to like maybe you and I now, we've been doing this fitness thing a while. I mean, for me to get a lot stronger, it's not a lot. That's the point. I can't get a lot stronger.
Hmm.
I can get stronger, but it's not like when I first started training, right? The honeymoon effect is a real thing. I think with someone who's been more sedentary, you start to load your body in very novel ways, and the body and the brain is very highly adaptable, and your brain really pays attention to a novel stimulus. So we kind of have that honeymoon effect going on, where starting to move and exercise supporting a lot of healthy things that can help us reduce pain. It's definitely a real thing, how getting yourself off the couch and starting to move can fix a lot of issues, even when you aren't necessarily being specific
Mm-hmm.
to, a neck pain or a knee pain. Just the novelty of exercising can literally solve those things.
Yeah. And as a potential explanatory mechanism, in the past, you've talked a lot about muscle tone
Yep.
and how stimulating different parts of the brain can change your muscle tone.
Mhm.
And when you were talking about like tension under threat earlier in this episode, it just kind of makes sense to me that oh, okay, if you're getting novel stimulus that may be affecting your muscle tone and you don't feel like you need to hold
Mhm.
those muscles tight to stay safe all the time, right? Like
Mhm.
that you could just have less back pain, back tension, neck pain, whatever it is, right? Like,
Definitely. And you wanna know what comes to mind when you say it like that, and this is, I think, probably at play for a lot of people who are coming just off the couch and start exercising. You get a ton of additional vestibular activation just because you went from someone who's not moving through the world very much. Maybe you're not getting a lot of steps, you're not going for walks, you're not doing things dynamically, moving like an athlete. And now all of a sudden, just the additional movement through the world and moving up and down, moving side to side, that's a very novel stimulus for the inner ear. And you could literally experience very significant changes in posture and muscle tone if you've never moved like that before.
hmm,
And that could definitely help.
yeah. So I think we're starting to make the argument that expanding your movement box is a good thing, right?
Hmm.
That maybe expanding your movement box is a goal worthy in and of itself to solve pain,
Right.
to make yourself feel better, and to be, more capable.
100%. I honestly feel like that's my only goal. Like, it's my only fitness goal right now.
Hmm.
That's, I'm just sort of at a period of my life where that's my goal, is continue to expose my body to different ways of moving, creating novel ways of moving, challenging myself rather than, just chasing weight on the bar. I feel like expanding my movement box and getting that variability goes further for me as far as health and longevity goes.
I think it's worth disambiguating some terms here because when you start talking about moving and range of motion, words like flexibility come to mind,
Hmm.
mobility comes to mind. I think it's worth just kind of dissecting some of these terms a little bit
Sure.
and tell us how you think about what expanding movement means for someone.
Sure. So a lot of it is based on motor control,
Mhm.
right? And so that is a fancy term to essentially describe coordination. And coordination is basically rhythm. So when we create a movement, is the movement smooth, right? Is it accurate? That's really what coordination is. And then when we think about motor control, we often sort of assess the coordination through a full range of motion. So if you have very rhythmic movements through a full range of motion, to me, that is good coordination.
Mhm.
And then there's other things that come into play because then it's like, well, what type of coordination, right? Because it could be, a certain movement, it could be a hand-eye coordinated type of task, but generally speaking, rhythm that is expressed, rhythm and accuracy expressed in the movement through a full range of motion, that's good coordination, good motor control. And I think that with thinking about the movement box, that and balance is the foundation.
Hmm.
Balance is a big one because balance is essentially a prerequisite to everything that you want to do with your body. And we take it for granted because it's so reflexive,
Mhm.
right? It just, your neurology does its thing and hopefully helps you be balanced and stable. And until you have a balance problem, you don't acknowledge balance. Like, balance is one of those things that just gets completely ignored. It's like, oh yeah, train your balance when you're 70. That's when it's
Hmm.
important.
Sure.
But it's, everybody should be training their balance. To me, balance and coordination is the foundation of that movement box, and then everything else is kind of layered on top of that.
Okay. So in kind of practical terms, to expand your movement box, let's just use touching your toes for a second.
Yeah.
Is the goal then not to just increase range of motion, or is it more about doing it in a coordinated way that involves rhythm somehow. I guess I'm just trying to
Yeah.
see how we would apply this.
So to me, it's almost like you're starting to ask about like the difference between kind of a passive flexibility versus expressing motor control, like mobility.
Okay.
So maybe we should break down, the term mobility, because that's a popular one now. When we talk about mobility, and obviously that's going to be a very important part of this movement box too. Okay, it's probably the next quality, right? If I were to say the foundation is laid with coordination and balance, then mobility for me probably is the next one. Mobility is going to be a prerequisite to, all these things that we want to do. And mobility, we think about as your ability to actively control your range of motion, to actively be able to move through a full range of motion. And that is actually different from a passive flexibility, where let's use the example you were using about touching your toes. A passive way to touch your toes might be to just relax kind of into a forward folding position,
Mm-hmm.
sort of relying more on gravitational load to help you get closer to your toes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I could also rely on a person. I could have a person gently push on my back. And now I'm getting like there's an external factor here. It's the person pressing plus maybe some gravitational load. Anything that's going to be external, like any kind of prop or something that's going to help me with the forward fold so that I can relax further into the position, we would look at that as more of a passive range of motion, meaning I don't necessarily need to be in control of that range of motion. Okay, I can use something else to help me get there.
Mm-hmm.
I might have the flexibility to get to the position, but I might not have the motor control, especially at that end range of motion. Remember that motor controls the coordination.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we think of, how we think about like more of a passive flexibility. Now, mobility, being more active, means that you have the control to move your body through that range of motion, and you have the control to support the movement at its end ranges. So maybe now, if I'm forward folding, I'm pulling myself into the position. I'm using my flexor muscles to pull me as far forward as I can. And I have good strength at my end ranges of motion. If you have good strength and stability at your end ranges of motion, you're now expressing more motor control in the movement, right? Versus passively, if you don't have that motor control, we might think of that as a position that you don't necessarily own. You don't have the options yet. You can get there when somebody helps you get there, but you don't own the options yet to be able to support load at those end ranges. So that's the very important difference between what might be passive versus active slash mobility is usually what we would say. It's important for people to know that too, because mobility, the word is now becoming it's trendy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so everyone's sort of grouping all types of mobility and flexibility training is now kind of going under the umbrella of mobility. But when we get a little more technical and zoom in on it, I like to teach that mobility is more active.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I could see both being useful in an expanding your movement box context, but
Yes,
I think from what I've learned from you is that the preference is towards when you actively can put yourself in positions because of the neurology of it. Your
that's right.
brain is more involved. It's in control. It's sending signals as opposed to just receiving something.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's a gap between, and we call it the active passive gap. So when you look at any range of motion, generally what you experience is that if you assess somebody's passive range of motion, it is usually larger than their active one. So The difference between the passive range of motion and the active one is what we call the gap. And we want the smallest gap. We don't want that gap to be big. If there's a big gap between what is passive and active, we think about that as injury risk going up.
Right.
And then the problem is any range of motion that you can access through momentum is now dangerous. So this is highly important, especially if you're an athlete. You don't want to have a large gap. And so we try to close that gap, right, by training both, but putting a lot of emphasis on the active parts of it so that we can express good quality motor control through the largest available range of motion that we have.
Yeah. And I know I'm famous. Well, I'm not famous at all, but I'm always saying, there's an episode about this. We
Yeah.
had a whole episode on hyperflexibility.
Oh yeah, right.
And discuss at length kind of what happens when your passive range of motion far exceeds your active range of motion.
I mean, that's a huge deal for hypermobile individuals.
Hypermobile, that's the word.
Yeah, hypermobile.
Yep. I'm going to bring up another buzzword just because I feel like kind of getting our heads around the language is really useful for this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Functional movements.
Yes.
That's another trendy word. And I'm curious, when you think about expanding your movement box, how much you think about functionality, and I put that in quotes because let's define it as you understand it, but also versus just pure novelty.
Yeah.
Like how exotic do the movements need to be is kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, this is a great question. It's funny, that whole debate about what is functional and what's not is like, I'm at a point now where if I like say functional, I'm like, oh my gosh. Like
don't use the F word.
Yeah, like I think I'm probably going to get attacked for this. But at the same time, what do I mean?
Yeah.
like what does this mean? So it's a difficult thing. I don't necessarily even have my own organized definition of this, but I'll tell you how I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
If something is going to be more functional, to me, it means that there's a higher likelihood that learning that movement is going to translate easier to everyday life. Now, whether or not that happens is very debatable. Anything that we do in a gym, the amount of that translates to everyday life, I don't know what that percentage is. And I don't know how we would ever understand that. I think it is much less than we want it to be. In some ways, because what we do in a gym context can get very linear and very kind of dominant in certain planes of motion and not others. And a lot of what we do in a gym context does not have the same sensory inputs as movement in real life. Especially if you look at what it is to move athletically, like move through the world athletically versus have a barbell on your back and do, a squat or a split squat or something.
Mm-hmm.
And each thing has their benefits, right? If you want to get strong, you've got to move heavy weights. You're not going to necessarily try to move heavy weights dynamically the way that you would move light weights. It's just awkward and your risk might go up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there's a lot of nuance to it. But for something in my mind to be a little bit more functional, I'm thinking more novelty, more variables, more planes of motion. Right. So it's going to look a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more athletic than something that is more linear and kind of boxed in. Right. Kind of boxed in a gym setting.
So to kind of drive this question home, is it more useful to increase your ability to do like a lunge, a forward lunge, for example, than it is to do like a back bend?
Right.
and why?
Okay, so it's situational and based on how you want to use your body. So for some people, improving their back bend
Mm-hmm.
might be a useful thing. Okay. And for other people, they might not be using their body like that. It might not be as useful for them. But as far as like lunge patterns go, I feel like lunging is one of those things that really is for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as you get into movements that start to get closer to locomotion, like the idea of walking, like your literal gait cycle, that is human specific, right? So we want to be able to lunge in a variety of different ways, handle our body weight, stabilize ourselves. But here's where things go wrong a lot of times in training. People know this. What I said is not a secret, and they know this, and people are lunging, but they're doing it in a way that is still super unsophisticated compared to what happens in real life. So in the gym, you hold a pair of dumbbells. Both of them weigh the same thing. Maybe you're got 30 pounds on each side, and you're doing, let's say, forward lunges. Great. Forward lunges are good. You want to be able to do that. You want to build strength in the movement. And that's a good way to do it. But you're holding a symmetric load. And every time you lunge, your spine is in the same position, right? Let's call it neutral. That's another debatable thing that you can get attacked for. We start saying neutral spine. But it's relatively straight. For the untrained eye, your spine is straight. So you're lunging now, which has some challenge to it, right? It's not a bilateral movement, so it's definitely somewhat challenging. But you're holding the same amount of weight on each side of your body. Your spine's in the same position. Your head and neck is in the same position. Your eyes are looking in the same position. And there's literally nothing. There's nothing to interfere with that lunge. There's nobody bumping into you. There's no loud sounds necessarily. Everything's just very organized and controlled. Versus in real life, when you're moving like that, man, you might be looking to your left, right? Your eyes going up left. You might be lunging onto your right leg. Your spine is rotated to the right and laterally bent to the left. And at the same time, somebody's bumping into you, right? Imagine being an athlete, right? And in
A
like an
football
athletic
game or
situation.
something,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting to think about that. So we, in a gym context, we like to use resistance and we like to keep it as safe as possible. And we like to work within the rule set of what is safest for moving heavier loads. And that has a lot of value for getting stronger. But then, yeah, that ongoing debate is, well, how does that help me when in the real world things look completely different? And I don't know the answer, but this is why my training looks weird compared to what most people might look at as, general fitness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually practicing those lunges in different spinal positions, in different head positions. We have a whole drill set that we teach our students in our courses that is essentially for training what's called the VSR reflex. It's a vestibular spinal reflex, and it's your it's part of your vestibular neurology that helps you keep your body upright against gravity as you're moving through the world. And there's ways to kind of elicit the reflexes a little bit more. And so we're lunging in different directions, in different head positions and spinal positions, and even doing some of this with our eyes closed to remove the visual system, which we often rely on for a lot, as we should, but we don't want to be too reliant on it. Okay, we want to have good enough proprioception, good enough vestibular function to still be able to do this stuff when our eyes are closed. So yeah, it builds a case for why when we're trying to expand the movement box, eventually, once you have the foundations, once you've worked within those rule sets and you can move your body efficiently and safely under load, we want to start exploring now where different body positions, are important, different stances, different lunges, different spinal positions, and resistance, kind of resistance in an unconventional way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is where like clubs and bands and
Yeah.
kettlebells and just,
Yeah. There's
your
unconventional
daughter.
tools. Yeah. Unconventional tools come into play. The traditional stuff still works and it always will,
Yeah.
but if you're looking for variability and longevity, right, and that in building that movement box, then it does pay off to graduate from that stuff. Maybe not entirely give up on it by any means, but start to incorporate more dynamic types of, as we were just talking about, really equipment into your training.
You're starting to paint a picture of what this kind of expanding your movement box focus training would look like. Why don't we talk about some stuff you would recommend for someone just getting started, someone that might be more sedentary,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe they've got some nagging pain, maybe they just want to be more active to enjoy life more, to whatever it is. What do you usually like to do when you're starting out with people like that?
Well, I mean, basic strength training is still phenomenal, always will be. And when you're first learning and getting into exercise, it's just about learning the basic patterns. You want to learn what it is like to squat, and you do that within your current ability. You want to learn the more optimal mechanics for a split squat, right? Things kind of work from a more stable, stationary place to then you expand out to more movement, lunges where you're actually stepping and moving versus something a little bit more contained where you're like a split squat. But the basics of squatting, lunging, hip hinging, and then rotating, right, through the trunk, through the spine, and then our basics of pushing and pulling at a couple different angles, horizontal, vertical. And from there, because everybody wants to build their biceps, you can do some curls too. So, but really, if you're picking an exercise and learning how to do one or two lower body exercises that kind of fit that template of squatting, lunging, and hinging, and then you're picking one or two for the upper body, some variation of pulling and pushing, and then you add a little rotation as well. That's a great template to work with at first, and you can design a little strength training routine that only takes you 35, 40 minutes, and you can start to get a lot out of that. And I do think when you're first starting, you people have to hear this part, because this is what really bothers me about general fitness.
Hmm.
People think general fitness is just like a button you turn on and you do it, and then you punch in and you punch out. And the fact is, you actually have to treat it like a practice. Otherwise, you become that person that is still squatting like crap 30 years later.
Mm.
And it's kind of just how things work. It's like when I grew up playing youth sports, and you've got people's dads as your coach, right? And they assume like, okay, you know how to run, you know how to do push-ups, so go do those things, right? And they'll send us around the field for 20 laps, and we do push-ups at practice. And what do you see? You see kids doing push-ups from the age of, 8 to 22, and their push-up at 22 looks like it did when they were 8.
Hmm.
Right? Because we assume people know how to do these things, but we never actually connect with the practice and sort of ask ourselves, like, did that feel efficient? Like, was that it? Was I balanced? Was I stable? Like, did it feel good? Did I do it well? Let me compare what I did to somebody else who is doing it well. And I realized that you have to have a higher interest for that.
Yeah.
And that's problematic too, because if you're not super interested in those things and you're just looking to do the fitness stuff because you know it's healthy for you, I get that. But still, to some extent, you have to be willing to back off on the desire to want to do the intense stuff for a long period of time and, get the boot camp workout to feel like you did something versus like, did I actually take the time to learn how to do that pattern well, that movement well, because that's going to serve me longer versus just getting into the boot camp mentality of, hey, I do fitness to sweat, right? So that I can check the box. You do have to consider it a practice, especially when you're first learning, and that will serve you forever. Those workouts you do where you're checking the box because you sweat, that's here and gone, right? It's like when I post on Instagram. Post, gone. Like, now 900,000 people are going to scroll right past that. It doesn't matter anymore. I got to post again tomorrow or they're going to be mad at me.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, oh, God, I got to post again. Right. It's an emergency. And that's sometimes what happens with fitness is our workouts become an emergency. And then we gravitate towards the high intensity stuff so we can walk away feeling like our muscles are burning and our shirt is soaked. And there is value in working hard.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's value in that. But if you do it too soon and you're the person that's just, starting to get into training, it generally circles back to bite you in the rear end. When in fact, if you had taken the time to kind of methodically work through the different basic movement patterns and learn how to do them in, the healthiest way that you can, you'll notice that practice will keep on going. And you'll continue to learn how to make movements more efficient, forever. And that is something that training gives back to you, versus if you were the emergency worker outer person.
Yeah. This is something that I feel like yoga and Pilates kind of emphasize that regular strength training, Western strength training doesn't. Where it's like, oh, this is a practice.
Yeah,
like we're gonna just kind of go through these movements, and you're gonna get better at it over time. And I'm gonna give you tips on how to improve your form over months,
right,
over years, right? As
right.
opposed to, I'm gonna learn a squat, and I'm just gonna keep squatting for the rest of my life.
Right. So you can check the box. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can just check the box, and those emergency workouts it can become problematic if you're not careful.
Yeah. So we've got a couple principles that you've expressed here. One, start with your basic training movements.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's your more like compound, like two-legged movements. And then as that gets better and you own those movements, start adding more single leg stuff, start adding more complexity to what you're doing. The other thing that seems to be part of this deal is to treat it more like a practice and less like punching the clock.
Yeah.
And, personally, I know sometimes you just have to punch the clock in that.
I know.
If you're gonna be consistent, you just need to show up on days you don't want to, et cetera, right?
Yep.
But treating it with a level of curiosity, right? Like,
I like
how
that.
do I get better at this? How do I really feel this? Get my proprioception up, get my interoception up.
Yeah.
When do you start introducing more variability?
Oh man. Yeah, it's tough. I think the word you use, curiosity, man, that's great, because that's why I eventually gravitated towards more variety in my training. When do you do it? Well, you've got to be capable of the basics, and you have to know how to keep yourself safe, right? Because this is a controlled training environment. Like we need to be safe, and we can't necessarily prevent injury, but generally speaking, if we use good judgment, we're moving with reasonable quality, sort of working within the confines of those rules that we're eventually going to break. We're gonna stay pretty safe. Like I said before, injury in the gym often does not happen because you made a giant mistake. If you're just doing regular people type fitness training, right? It's because your lifestyle stress got too high, and you took that with you to the gym, right? And tension is the enemy of efficiency. So the movement you've been doing for a long time didn't go well that day, right? So once you have the basics under control, I think it's going to be different for each person. And it's hard for me to say, when do you now get to break those rules? Because it's exploratory and it really does come down to curiosity. And it also comes down to, how do you want to use your body? See, for me, it was an easier transition because I was a wrestler. And wrestling is incredibly dynamic.
Right.
One of my, when I coached wrestling, one of the parents who I loved that was always around, he said, wrestlers are like gymnasts that want to kill you.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was really funny because it's very gymnastic like, and it's very dynamic, and you're in very awkward positions. And so for me, it was an easy thing to understand. And I may have talked about this really early on when we did a podcast on my history with training and education and all this stuff. And I think I may have mentioned the story of my friend Tom, who was the one who introduced me into the Burdenko method.
Mm-hmm.
And when he did that, that was my first experience, and this was in college. That was my first experience with what it is to have true variability in your training. Because even in the Burdenko method, you don't even train a movement at the same speed.
Yeah.
Everything that you learn, you train slow, medium, and fast speeds, which is really unique in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a ton of coordination involved in it. There's a lot of balance involved. There's a lot of mobility involved. It's very dynamic. And when I first met Tom and got to know him more, one of the things that he pointed out to me that I very clearly remember is that, and he used skiing as what he was talking about, because he's a big skier himself and coaches. And he basically said, we're doing all of these lunge patterns and we're allowing our knee to go way over our toe. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, we're breaking the rules,
Yeah.
I've been making sure that I don't do that in the gym. And he's like, well, no, at some point you have to, because think about what it is to ski or what it is to wrestle. How many times does your knee go over your toe in wrestling? Well, just about every single movement I make. Well, then why are you dedicating so much time to making sure it doesn't when you're in the gym? And that, for me, was like, whoa, full stop. Now I get it. Insert any body part into this conversation that you want, or any activity. And what we do in a gym is nothing like what we do in the activities that we want to enjoy. So I don't know the answer. When do you start breaking those rules? I think all I can say is, when you are confident in your own abilities with those basics, then you can start exploring.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a really fun time to start to break those rules. And it builds another layer of movement confidence that builds the movement box and starts to give you some very unique options.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about people just picking up other modalities? Like, if they've been doing this strength training and then they do add like a yoga session, or they do
I like that.
add a sport or whatever it might be. Like,
yeah, I like it. I think that there is a higher risk when doing that,
mm-hmm.
depending on what we're talking about, because for the general population, when you do that, you're not necessarily in a controlled environment for it. So let's say I am somebody who's done yoga for 10 years
Mm-hmm.
and I've built my confidence in yoga and I'm really solid with yoga. And now somebody's like, hey, you should strength train. And I'm like, yo, you know what? I heard my yoga instructor said I should also strength train, because all I've been doing is practicing flexibility and mobility. So I go to my local CrossFit, and now I get thrown to the wolves who have been doing this for a long time. And maybe I'm not getting the foundations that I need,
Yeah.
or the coaching that I need. Obviously, it's different for everybody and based on where you go. But the point is, I could get myself in a situation where I'm not getting the graded exposure at the right level, and maybe I go too far, and therefore now my risk goes up. But I do like the idea of taking on new activities, especially as you get older. I think it's one of the most valuable things that you can do for your brain
Mm.
is to learn something new. Because you get to a point in life, right, where it's like, how many new things are you actually learning? It's kind of embarrassing. I think about that compared to like watching my 4-year-old daughter right now. Like every single thing she's doing, she's learning.
Yeah.
And I'm watching, like, she just started preschool, and all of a sudden she's writing, and she's every single day she's learned a tremendous amount. And it's so interesting to watch because if she has exposure to something for a very small amount of time, like maybe the two of us practice something for 2 minutes, right? And that would be a very good training session
Sure.
for us.
Attention spans,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. 2 minutes would be very good. And then she's like, okay, I'm done with this. And we move on to 1,000 other things. And I'm like, oh, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I guess she didn't really like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then like 10 days later, she shows that to me and does it perfectly.
Mm.
And I'm like, what the heck? Like, I thought you didn't like it. You couldn't do it when we tried it. But because you revisited it and you had built all these other layers in that time and had exposure to all these different things, you were now able to piece it together and do it. And to me, that's really fascinating. So as an adult, obviously we still can learn, but we just have a tendency to not put ourselves in an environment where a ton of learning is happening, especially physically. So if you can start a new activity, I think it's great. I mean, when I picked up jujitsu, I felt a lot more than just, hey, I'm getting a good workout. It just felt it felt like it was doing a lot for me cognitively.
Yeah.
And it was a neat feeling to have that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the neuroprotective benefits of learning new skills,
Yeah.
of trying to prime neuroplasticity
Right.
when it's not as common, but that can do really good things. And so I think that's just another argument for expanding your movement box, right? It's like if
It is.
you are doing new things with your body, like that's actually going to do good things for your brain.
100%. And anything that can be trained can be detrained. Right? So we have to remember that box can shrink, and usually when it does, it was by accident. Right? So we have to be mindful of that. So taking on new experiences, new movement practices, or just expanding on the one that you have by sort of acknowledging, you know what, I've been doing this exercise the same way for so long. Maybe I should explore a slightly different way of doing it. Maybe I could change something about this that just makes it different so that I can give my body and my brain a different movement experience. It goes a really, really long way, and it can be subtle. It can be a different foot position. It can be moving at a different speed. That's a really big one. We've talked about it in past episodes where we get stuck in moving in our own internal sort of rhythm. So when we exercise, we generally move at the same speed the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe now setting a metronome for yourself to kind of learn doing the same movement that you've been practicing, but what does that feel like at a slightly different tempo? Because when you take that split squat that you've done for 15 years, you've done it at your own internal rhythm, and then all of a sudden you turn a metronome on and you ask yourself to move faster and match it to the metronome, now it's a new movement. But you still have the foundations that you need for the movement. But we change something about that variability, and I think that can really offer people a lot. We can do that for any of the more traditional style exercises that we've been practicing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, change an angle, change the implement you're using.
Yes, the equipment's a big one. Yeah, some equipment limits our range of motion. Some equipment allows us more range of motion, right? So some of our strength training tools can make loads become more asymmetric versus the traditional symmetric bilateral exercise that we all get boxed into as well. So there's a lot of possibilities there. And back to that word you used, curiosity. If you have curiosity, then you can really take that and run with it.
Hmm. What are some things you might do outside of traditional strength training with variation, like we've been discussing,
So
if anything?
still considering it like
It,
part
with
of a training?
with the goal of expanding your movement box.
Mm.
I'll bring up an example that you've
Yeah.
mentioned before: rolling around on the ground in
Oh
different
yeah.
ways.
Yeah, yeah.
That
Phenomenal.
that wouldn't usually be considered part of like a
Yeah.
traditional strength training program.
Yeah.
So why are you doing it? Is it something that Gen Pop should be considering?
Yeah.
And if so, how?
Yep. Everyone should consider ground based movement. Okay. Because someday you're going to feel like you can't get yourself to the ground very easily. And that is a problem because the most threatening possible thing in human existence physically is falling.
Hmm.
And so you have to be able to be confident in handling your body and knowing how to communicate with the ground in a way that is different from just standing there on two legs. So the movement box concept is very important for ground based movement. I love the ground stuff. I think it offers so many different unique qualities that can add to our fitness. It's fun. It pushes your limits. It challenges your coordination. It challenges your stability. If you're doing the rolling, like you mentioned, it's a very strong vestibular activation.
Mm-hmm.
You can make it more playful if you want, or you can make it very intense. It depends on what you want to get out of it. But I love the rolling, the crawling, all that stuff is fantastic. And I feel like for the general population, that's key, right? It's key because when you're 70, if you have no experience handling yourself on the ground, it can become problematic fast. Yeah.
One of my coaches loved what she would call like bear crawls.
Hmm.
And so basically, instead of crawling on your hands and knees, you're crawling on like the balls of your feet and your hands.
Oh,
And her emphasis was on like moving like cross laterally. So your
yep,
left foot would go forward and your right hand would go forward.
definitely.
And then you would do the opposite. And with an emphasis on kind of like you're keeping your core braced.
Yep.
And, I would go down the hallway and back and be like, man, that was
Oh,
intense.
it'll smoke you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Mm-hmm. So
Great core work.
do you have like a go-to something like that you would recommend or as a starting point for people if like you've never done any ground sports, you've never done any kind of rolling, tumbling, anything like that? What
Yeah.
do you recommend?
Okay. So for rolling, an exercise that we call a partial roll, and you can actually, I think, find this on my YouTube channel if you search partial roll. And a partial roll is simply just sitting on the ground and you bend your knees up towards your chest and you basically hold your knees with your hands. And the idea is to round your back. And from there, all you do is fall backwards and you try to keep your back nice and rounded so that as you make contact with the mat, you roll across your back and all the way up to your shoulder blades, not onto your neck, but onto your shoulder blades. And then the idea is to use the momentum and roll back, sort of retrace the movement, returning to an upright seated position, again, holding your knees. Partial rolling is sort of what we use as the foundation for teaching people more advanced rolling patterns. This by itself, if you've never done anything like it, will offer you mobility of the spine and the hips, which is very important. And it will be a very good core exercise too, because as you roll and you use momentum, your core muscles are activating, and you'll feel that because you might do 10 of these rolls and be like, woof, my abs are tired, which is weird. I didn't think about this as an ab exercise, but it'll feel that way if you've never done it before. And it also is a strong vestibular activation because you're moving quite quickly through space, and you're moving your head quite quickly, which is super important for people. Most people accidentally get deconditioned as far as their vestibular system goes because they stop moving quickly. So this kind of ground stuff that is dynamically, well, you're rolling very dynamically, and your head is moving through different planes very quickly. That's really good for your inner ear.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things that you would get from a basic exercise like that, but partial rolling is where you would start, 3 sets of 10 rolls kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and just practicing it like a skill. Because at first you're probably going to try it, and it's going to be like thump because your back is going to be flat,
Uh-huh.
and you're going to get that feedback, and then I got to round my back more. And then you'll try 5, and all of a sudden, whoa, you'll bail out and tilt over to the side and lose your knees and do a yard sale. And then you gotta gather yourself, find the shape of the body again, and try again. It's a great exercise, and it leads you to a lot of other ones. So that's a good one for rolling to start with. And then for crawling, you basically described it. It's a contralateral type patterning when you crawl. Now, you could start with kind of a typical baby crawl where you're on your hands and your knees. And as you crawl, your opposite hand and leg is coordinated together as you advance forwards. And then you would also want to do all of this backwards.
Correct. Yep.
Which is quite challenging. The coordination is tricky. So that would be maybe where somebody would start to develop the coordination. And then from there, you would progress to what we have, I think in the past, called it either hovering or like a beast crawl. There's so much. I've called exercises so many different things in my life. I now have no names for anything. So I'm not an exercise name guy. I'm like, okay, let's just do this movement. So this style of crawling, I think more similar to what you described, where you would dig your toes into the mat,
Mm-hmm.
and then you've got your hands on the mat. And by pushing your toes and your hands into the mat, your knees will come off the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll hover. And you want your knees to hover only a few inches off the ground. And you've got to be really locked in and stable now in your midsection. And then you begin to crawl. Same pattern, opposite hand, opposite leg, forwards and backwards. That's the first one that I think people will get a lot out of. A lot of upper body strengthening, a lot of core strengthening, lots of coordination, especially on the backwards. Really, really good. If you, in your next workout, decided, okay, I listened to the Cruise Elite podcast, in my warm-up, I'm going to include partial rolls and contralateral crawling, forwards and backwards. If you do that in your next warm-up before you go into the rest, that is a win, right? That would be a nice addition variety-wise. If you want to take it one more level, each time you do the exercise, change the speed. So do one partial roll as slow as you can, one set. The next one, a little bit faster, call it medium speed. Finally, as quick as you can. You can do the same thing with crawling. Slow, medium, fast, forwards, backwards. Really, really nice addition. Good novelty, fun, challenging. A lot can come from it.
Yeah. That sounds like a great add-on. I actually want to add that back to my warm-up because it's something that fell out of my rotation. But the partial rolls you describe, I think are pretty common in like mat Pilates type stuff as well.
Stuff like that. Yep.
Yeah.
It's a good, you see it a lot in gymnastics too, like just beginner gymnastics. And I think that's probably where I originally got it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about T-spine mobility, because that's something that I hear people talk about a lot. And whenever I do something where they're like, this is T-spine mobility, it feels like it's something that I never do in my other training. How much do you think about it? Is it useful? If it is, what do you like to do?
Yeah, I think it's very useful. So T-spine mobility is essentially the ability for you to be able to actively move your mid-back and your rib cage. That's the area of the body that we would be thinking of when we say T-spine. So that's the thoracic spine and rib cage. That is very important. It is very important from a movement perspective because even though the thoracic spine by design does not necessarily move through a huge degrees of freedom, right? It actually doesn't move that much. It's still hypercritical for creating a lot of other movements, like being in a rhythm with what we're doing with our legs or our pelvis or our arms. And actually, we can do something together right now that our listeners can try at home, and you can feel how your shoulder mobility overhead is very much dependent on how your thoracic spine moves. So here's what I mean by that. If you pick an arm and straighten it out in front of you, and then you test your ability to raise your arm up overhead while keeping your elbows straight, you can kind of get a sense for how far you can go. And you can even look at your own arm and you can say, okay, my bicep is basically just in front of my ear, let's say. Okay, and that's my range of motion. You put your arm down. Now take your mid back and round it a little bit, right? So you're actually making like a little camel shape of your upper back. And you're going to hold that position and now raise your arm again and keep the camel back. And what you'll notice for most people is you won't have as much range of motion. You'll get a little stuck because your thoracic spine is rounded. But if you do the opposite of the camelback and you extend, bringing your sternum forwards and up as you get nice and long, and then you go up into the overhead position, you'll feel more degrees of freedom. So your thoracic spine has a lot to do with being in a rhythm with, let's say, your humerus and your scapula, right, for an overhead position. So when the thoracic spine becomes rigid, lots of movement compensations take place. Someone with a thoracic spine that doesn't move well generally has limited shoulder flexion. And you can see why, you can feel why. And those compensations will actually take place all across the body, lower body and upper body. A rigid thoracic spine also will compromise your breathing. So people don't necessarily understand this at first until they've really been exposed to it. But your rib cage moves quite a bit. And if you put your hands around your lower ribs and you take a big inhale and you try to breathe into your own hands, hopefully you feel three-dimensional expansion of your rib cage. And your rib cage moves quite a bit. So if your rib cage is immobile, and it can become immobile, your breathing is compromised. You become a shallow breather. You don't want to be a shallow breather, because if you're a shallow breather and you breathe poorly for an extended amount of time, usually what happens is it's shallow and fast. We call it like a chronic hyperventilation, even if you can't necessarily see it in somebody. That throws off the chemistry of your internal body, right? And that can lead to a lot of problematic things with your internal health. And it's a different conversation from there. But the point being, our spine needs to be able to move. So T-spine mobility is super important, and it's very foundational for essentially every large movement that you want to make. But it's also super important for breathing, which is one of the reasons why we teach so many thoracic mobility motor control drills.
These are the kinds of insights that I think, at least for me, drive this stuff home, where it's like, yes, the movement is good. It's nice to be able to get in a deep lunge. It's nice to be able to get in a deep squat.
Yep.
But there's all these other connected systems and benefits from being able to do this stuff as well.
Man, I'll tell you what, one of the most interesting things, and you got to be a nerd to go and do this, but I understand that, but maybe some of our listeners are nerdy enough. I know most of them are, actually. So if you take a movement and let's say we take that, let's just say we do a squat, okay? Do a squat, a body weight squat, and you feel what that's like. You know, how deep can I go comfortably? How efficient does this feel? Does anything feel tight? whatever. And then you start changing one thing about the squat. The squat stays the same, meaning it's the same movement you just produced.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't neurologically, and we're about to change little teeny variables so that you can feel the difference. But if you take that squat and now I have you squat with your head turned to the left, you won't believe how different it will feel. You might even lose a tremendous amount of mobility when
Mm-hmm.
you go down. Maybe try your head turned to the right. Totally different. If I take one of your feet and I say, hey, I want you to just outwardly rotate one of your feet, I mean 10 degrees,
Mm-hmm.
do the same squat. You'll be like, man, that ruined my squat.
Mm-hmm.
I've never squatted like that. I don't know how. I can't get deep anymore. Things feel crooked. Like, what happened? I could say, hey, I want you to put one foot on this little 3-inch deficit, right? So one foot's on a elevated surface. One foot's not. Try the squat. And you might say, wow, that's totally different. Interestingly enough, sometimes by adding variability like this, you say, oh my gosh, that felt amazing.
Mm.
And this is something that I sometimes do with weird little nagging pain issues. Let's change something. Try standing on this little elevated surface on one foot only. Now squat. Hey, that's weird. First time I've done a squat in 10 years with no knee pain. Oh, okay. So we found an entry point. We can still work on your squat, but we've changed something about it. Maybe it was purely the novelty that allowed your brain to do the squat.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there was some sort of mechanical difference that was more, or I should say less threatening, more efficient for the body.
Yeah.
Whatever the case is, having that kind of movement exploration is a good way to like get some options. And sometimes it's something you can even lean on for dealing with pain, oddly enough. But it's educational. It's like, man, by changing one little thing, I feel either more restricted or I feel more free. And then you think about what happens in the real world when we're moving and doing things that we think are the movements that we're performing in the gym, like a perfect bilateral squat with our body straight, our spine stiff, and our eyes looking forwards every single time. And that's not what you're doing in the real world, right? In the real world, one foot's on an elevated surface, one foot's on grass, the other's on pavement, your trunk's rotated, your eyes are left, right? You're doing stuff, you're multitasking.
The ground might be at an angle.
Yeah, it's interesting to have those experiences and work through a little exploratory workout, if you will, to learn about it.
So we started this conversation talking about hiking.
Yeah.
And I also was talking about my 5K training. One of the things that I realized was, on some days, like if it's raining or something, I'll go to like the community center that has a treadmill and I'll do my training there. But most of the time I'm trying to do my training outside because when I'm running the race, I'm going to be outside and it is night and day different, right?
Yeah.
The slight inclines, turning, going uphill, downhill, compared to a treadmill, it's just like, it doesn't feel almost like I'm doing the same mileage,
It's totally different. Yeah, totally different. I don't know the math on it, but it's very different. You just don't get the variety.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting about a treadmill too is some people have more aches and pains on a treadmill than they do running outside. For some people, it can act as sort of a sensory mismatch because you're running and your proprioceptive system says you're running. Your vestibular system says you're running because you're bouncing up and down a little bit. And then your eyes are like, we're not running. Yeah. So your brain gets a little bit confused about that. And yeah, most people, I think, probably won't encounter a problem, but some people will say it's the weirdest thing. I can do my runs in the winter when I stay at home and I can do my runs in the summer when I'm out, in the neighborhood. And then in the winter, I switch to my treadmill and my damn ankle acts up.
Mm-hmm.
Why is my ankle acting up on the treadmill versus, in the summer, I'm able to run and do whatever I want. So once in a while you hear stuff like that, and it's interesting, right? Because it's a major part of the sensory profile of running that's missing.
That makes a ton of sense. So yeah, I was gonna posit maybe what do you think about just for expanding movement variability instead of always going for a walk on a flat plane, maybe finding a park with sloping hills or a hill you can
Love it.
walk up or something.
I love it. Yeah.
Hiking is great for that. Or instead of running on the treadmill, getting outside and finding a place you can trail run or
I
just
love it.
city run.
Yeah. I mean, just getting outside, obviously there's so many benefits to the fresh air and the sunlight, but just the variability of the surface,
Hmm.
right? And the differences that you can encounter. Love it. It's very, very beneficial. No question.
Yeah. What's the weirdest thing that you might have someone do to expand their movement box, just off the top of your head?
Um Visualize the movement before doing it.
Mm.
Yeah. Of course we might do eyes closed too,
Hmm.
to kind of drive a lot more proprioception and challenge. I mean, that's not necessarily something I would do with a beginner, but sometimes with movement variability, especially when you're working with somebody that maybe has been in chronic pain and you're teaching them how to move better, but there's some fear around it. Sometimes visualizing doing the movement before you actually do that movement, like literally closing your eyes and trying to imagine doing it, and of course without the limitation of pain,
Right.
can be amazing. I think I just recently brought this up in one of our calls with our students in our courses, because it's an amazing tool that very few people know about or use. It's almost like it seems too silly. Like, how could that work?
Hmm.
But I have had instances with more deconditioned individuals who have had to work through chronic pain issues. I've had some experiences where giving them the homework of just visualizing the movement was all I really needed them to do. And that sort of became an entry point for us.
Hmm.
And you can use it in a sense of like doing it like that, or you can use it in the sense like real time, like visualize the movement we're about to practice together.
Right.
And that can help too. It's really interesting and can be very effective for people.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I know that that's something that a lot of, or at least when I was learning the barbell lifts, people would recommend visualizing the full,
Yeah.
like visualizing walking up to the bar, putting up the chalk on your hands, like getting in
Oh,
position,
yeah.
visualizing all 5 reps from start to finish, visualize putting it down.
Hmm. I mean, elite athletes know this,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
It's just that people don't think it can be used as like a rehab tool because
Right.
that's unusual,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
but it's neat. You can see decreases in pain in the moment, which is really,
That's crazy.
yeah, like
Yeah.
when people have more like protective based pain, you can kind of down regulate the nervous system a little bit through that. Like when you visualize movement, you're still activating a lot of the
Right.
same pathways.
Right.
You're not getting the same proprioceptive feedback, of course, but there's activity. So it's always fascinating to me. It's like I think about this, I go down the rabbit hole in my mind of like how does your brain know what's real and what's not, and does it even have a scale for that?
Hmm.
Because everything is perceived. That's why I'm not afraid to try anything. Like with a pain issue or a drill. Like I talk a lot about this with our students, because when our students are learning some of this advanced neurology, it can be intimidating because you're with your client and you're going to try this weird thing, and is it going to work? And I try my best to get people over those fears, because number one, something's always going to change, and you'll know that if you look for that. And it might be better, it might be worse, it doesn't matter, it's still information. But when you think about it that way, you realize everything is perceived. So if I can just change the way my brain perceives something, perceives my pain, perceives this health condition, perceives this movement, if I can change the way it perceives it, then I can completely change the experience. And so that's technically what we're doing with the applied neuro stuff. So we're changing the experience based on delivering different types of sensory input.
Mm-hmm.
So what's real? What's not? Does the brain know? It's all fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Are we just a brain in a vat, you know?
Right.
But what we do know is that your brain is constantly checking reality with these
Constantly
various
monitoring.
systems. There's your visual system, there's your vestibular system, there's your proprioceptive system, there's other senses. And so what you said earlier about sensory mismatch, you know, that's where we start to see problems, right? That's where people get
Exactly.
seasick or motion sickness or
Yeah, or a sensory mismatch. So those are the types of sensory mismatch people are familiar with.
right.
But knee pain is a sensory mismatch. A headache is a sensory mismatch.
Hmm.
Heartburn is a sensory mismatch. To some degree, you can explain it that way because if there's missing input, right, then things change. Output changes. Anything that is an output, okay? Keep in mind your thoughts. They're an input and an output, but they're an output. You know, I think they work as an input too. So I said that, but they are a construct of a lot of other pieces of information that are being organized and processed in your brain. So many different things could be considered sensory mismatch, and that's how we explain it at a really basic level.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can balance those things out by providing the right input so that those sensory systems are getting the input they need, then your brain is more willing to trust it because it's going to find balance in the information. And your brain is constantly monitoring your internal and external environment, essentially trying to see if all the different types of inputs coming in line up and make sense. And if they don't, because there's poor input or missing input, that's when your brain basically says, wait, full stop, something doesn't line up here. And the result is going to be protective based outputs. And that's the pain. That's the decrease in performance. That's the anxiety, the depression. There's so many things you could put on the list, right?
Hmm.
But that's how I look at it in a nutshell. And that's why with neuro anyway, try anything and, kind of assess and see what areas need input.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope people, these philosophical questions, but also just for your own movement practice, I hope people approach this stuff with a sense of curiosity, right?
Yes, there's that word.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right, there it is. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. Wow, we went for a while. We covered a lot of ground. And I actually really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you guys did too. And I hope that it inspires you to think about your movement practice a little bit. If you weren't considering it a practice and you've always considered it a workout, maybe start to consider it a practice. Take a little bit more time, consciously connect with what you're doing, try to improve the quality of what you're doing. And if you're more experienced and you're ready to really kind of break those traditional rules we talked about, look for some ways to do that. You can always get some inspiration from my YouTube channel. And if you guys are enjoying the podcast, also make sure to go give us a 5-star review because that's been good lately. People have been doing that, and it's really, really helpful for us. So thank you so much for listening. We'll be back soon.